If anyone's familiar with the Buddhist Precepts, Diane Rossetto's version may seem just a little different, and at the same time you may not have noticed anything too odd about them. The Precepts are vows people make when committing to the Buddhist path. Taking the precepts is a statement of faith. It's akin to a Christian baptism, or a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah in Judaism, or making the shahada in Islam, claiming that no God but God and Muhammad is God's prophet, right? The precepts lay out the values and virtues one commits to when taking up the way of living as a Buddhist. Each Buddhist sect, each Sangha, each group usually has just a slightly different version of the precepts that they use in their community. Some versions have 10, some 5, some 8. They all cover the basic same ground. And yet, and this is where Diane Rossetto is a little different, and I really like her version, the precepts are usually phrased as negatives. I refrain from. I refrain from. I promise to refrain from. I vow to refrain from. However, Diane Rossetto casts them as a positive. I take up the way of. I take up the way of. It's an important shift, because if we want to live purposefully, to do what's right with integrity, we don't want to just be avoiding things that are wrong. We want to be doing things that are right. We don't want to be just, say, avoiding sin, as they might say in some settings. We want to be practicing virtue. Now, Unitarian Universalists generally are people who do not like to be told what to do. No dogma, no creed, no religious practices imposed on us by a minister or a book. Maybe with the exception of covenant, which is the agreement we all make about how to treat each other and live in community together, we basically have very few mandatory instructions, rules, demands, commands in our faith. Because of this, it falls on each and every one of us to engage a lifelong responsible search for truth and meaning, which means taking up ways for ourselves that we will adhere to, that help us live out the life we value, that holds up the things we value and the virtues we aspire to. Because our tradition, despite its openness, is not a place where you can believe whatever you want. Right? It is not a place where we just let anything go. We have a very big tent, and yet the biggest tent you'll find, it will still be possible to stand outside that tent and get sunburned or rained on. Right? So, as big a tent as we have, it is possible to be outside it. If you're going to aspire to the ways of hatred and racism and violence, that doesn't really fit in the tent so well, right? And yet, we're still left with the individual responsibility to hold ourselves accountable to something higher than just, no one can tell me what to do. Well, someone can tell you what to do. You. And I think a lot of us, a lot of the time, back away from that. It is hard, it is difficult, it is not easy to take up the ways of living well and holding yourself to them. We are human. We all make mistakes at it. The precepts in Buddhism are good ideas to live by. They are echoed in many other traditions. I take up the way of speaking truthfully. I take up the way of speaking of others with openness and with possibility. I take up the way of meeting others on an equal ground. I take up the way of cultivating a clear mind. I take up the way of taking only what is freely given and giving freely of all I can. I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy, respectfully and with an open heart. I take up the way of letting go of anger. I take up the way of supporting life. Our theme for the month as we start off this year is expectation. So as I see these precepts, I expect all of this of myself. So I want to speak to you this morning about what I expect of myself as a new minister coming into this community. I expect myself to speak to you the truth as I see it. I expect of myself to speak to you, to everyone, with openness and with possibility. I expect myself to meet you on equal ground. I expect myself to do all things that are life-giving to individuals and to this community. When I say I expect of myself to speak the truth as I see it, this means I will be a straight shooter, especially in my ministry. I will not avoid speaking my truth to you. I will speak my truth in the pulpit. I will speak my truth to you in person and individually. I will speak my truth to you in groups, in teams, in committees. I will tell you honestly what I see. I will tell you honestly what I am thinking. And perhaps most importantly of all, I will tell you how I feel. I will be kind. This is part of meeting everyone with openness and possibility and being life-giving. But I want to differentiate between being kind and being nice. They're not the same thing. All too often, I think being nice gets in the way of being kind. Kindness is about justice and compassion and honesty. Nice is all too often about avoiding conflict, not hurting feelings, making sure there are no ruffled feathers. You know what? When I speak the truth, I will never, ever intentionally speak truth to ruffle feathers or hurt someone's feelings. And yet, as we speak honestly to each other with openness and possibility, I know that I will say some things that may do that. And I want you to know, I don't do that to hurt, or to point at you, or to make you feel bad. I do that because if we avoid the truth, we can't hold each other in compassion. It is possible to be kind and respectful and compassionate. I will not eat my classmates, even if I have hard things to say to them. But when you hear something that's hard for you, and you have sadness or anger or frustration, I don't want you to be nice by not telling me. I want you to say, you know that thing you said the other day in that meeting, that made me really angry. And then I can say, oh, I'm sorry, tell me about that. And then we can start building a real serious and deep relationship. But if we run away from those things, we spend our life in community just being nice to each other, which only lasts so long, and then it gets caught up in difficult feelings and emotions that if we're going to be in real relationship, they got to come out, and we got to trust that the other person is not going to run away in anger. Because when we let go of anger, that means not dealing with it. That's not letting it go. Letting go of anger means acknowledging it so it can't control you anymore. So if I'm angry with you, I'm going to do my best. I expect myself to say, hey, that thing you said or did made me angry. And I just want to talk to you about that. Because then we can let go of the anger. And the interesting thing about anger is it's always easier to let go of together. We can do it on our own. But it's always easier to let go of together in partnership. I expect myself to let go of my anger. That's not the same thing as not getting angry. It means dealing with anger in a mature and responsible way. I expect myself to always stay at the table with you. If I feel really hurt or really angry, I may say, I can't talk to you about that right now. Can we meet next Tuesday? And then we can have a difficult conversation. But I expect myself to stay in the game and at the table. I promise you, I will not take my ball and go home in a huff of emotion. You know why? Because I expect myself not to eat my classmates. It's not a good thing to eat your classmates. No one to play with after that, right? I expect myself to meet you on open ground, openness and possibility. I expect myself, therefore, to remain as less anxious as I can. I do not believe there is any such thing as being non-anxious. We are all anxious at least a little bit, at least all of the time. It is my job, however, what you have asked me to be here to do, to try and remain less anxious than most of you most of the time. If I can do that, that's what I expect of myself, and I will be very happy. I will do my best. I expect myself to not take things personally. But let's be real. If somebody says to me, I hated the way you set up the room this morning and knocked your stuff over while you were talking, I'm going to be like, geez. But that'll be a flash, and I will remember my precepts, and I will go, okay, I'm not going to be angry, and I'm not taking it personally. But the next time we're at a committee meeting, I may say, wow, could you do that not in front of 4 other people next time? Because I expect myself to meet you on equal ground, I will promise that I expect of myself to listen before I respond. To listen with the intent of hearing you, not of thinking of what I want to say next. I expect that of myself. Right? That's what I'm going to try to do. Because I expect myself to facilitate a clear mind. I expect myself to respect the way things have always been done. But I also expect myself to point out why and how continuing some of those ways may not be the best thing for us as a community if we want to achieve vitality and growth. I expect myself to come to you in openness and honesty, and part of that means I expect of myself to be a spokesperson for the Unitarian Universalist religious tradition. And I expect myself to serve as its guardian, not only in our community, but in the community at large. For me, this means a few things. I expect myself to honor your spiritual path, but I also expect myself to translate for myself. Because I have a certain spiritual path and language, I do not expect you to have to use it. I expect to hear what you say and do my own translation of what that means in my path. Not to get upset at you if you never use the words of my path. Because one thing we do here is we honor people on all these different individual spiritual paths. So we all have to be translators. And it's our responsibility to translate, not the responsibility of someone to learn our language. Think of it. Speak English in America. Right? Do you do that spiritually in your religious community? Right? You'd better speak, religiously the way I want you to, or, love it or leave it. No, that's not what we do here. So I expect myself to listen and translate. Because I am a guardian of our tradition, and our tradition has made a public statement and promise to be more anti-racist and dismantle white supremacy culture, I will speak of that a lot. And I guarantee that some of you, even if you're not in agreement with me, are going to get sick of it. You know how I know this? Because I totally believe in doing this and working with some of my colleagues of color and my colleagues of different sexual expressions and stuff. I get sick of it as a straight white cisgender. I mean, I got all the privileges you can name. I got them racked up so high they're going to tip the bookcase over. So even I get frustrated with it. And I'm supposed to hold it up. So I can very well expect myself to do so, and very well expect you, even if you're on my side, to sometimes go, God, again? Right? But I expect that of me, because I've promised my other colleagues and my other ministers I will do that, even when it's got me frustrated and angry and I just don't get it. Because I expect myself to deal openly and honestly with possibility, I fully expect of myself to completely ignore anonymous feedback. I also expect of myself to completely ignore any feedback that comes from everyone, someone, some people, nobody. You know why? One, it's eating your classmates, and two, those people don't exist. I expect myself to speak for myself when I speak to you. And I expect you to speak of yourself when you speak to me. I expect myself to keep an open mind and allow myself to change my mind and be corrected. I had an exchange on email already this week where I was pretty adamant about how I felt about something, about not doing something till we had a policy here to deal with it. And people said, no, I disagree with that. And I was like, okay, I respect that disagreement, but let's put that as a priority, get that policy done so we're not caught on it. I don't know, I might have been wrong. I expect that of myself, to admit I might have been wrong. I expect myself, when I'm having trouble, to ask for help. I believe asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And I expect myself, when I'm having a hard time, that I will ask for help. And thus I expect myself to learn from my mistakes. I expect of myself to always give my best effort and to have compassion for myself. And I expect myself to remember that when things are difficult, that even though I expect myself to do my best is going to change day to day, hour to hour, sometimes even minute to minute. I expect myself to welcome, include, and honor people of all ages, and to hold this value up as part of our tradition. And I expect myself to do all these things I've mentioned because I expect myself to live in covenant with you. Living in covenant with each other means we do our best to honor the promises we've made to each other about how to treat each other and be with each other. And this may be the most important thing I say this morning. I fully and completely expect myself to fail at this miserably, at least at some point and some time during the coming year. Because I expect myself to be nothing other than human, and that's what we do. And when that happens, and I fail, I expect myself to apologize. And I expect myself to be forgiven. And I expect to go on and build an amazing, vital, thriving, and growing, and deep community of faith. And I leave you with this. What do you expect from your son?